Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a focused look at Aimtron Electronics. They're in the electronics manufacturing services space, the EMS sector, and honestly, they've been generating some serious buzz lately.
Absolutely. We've got a management meet note here, pretty recent, and the first thing that jumps out really are these growth projections. They seem quite ambitious.
They really do. And this note, it's not just a high-level summary, is it? It feels like we're getting insights straight from the
Well,
leadership.
that's the idea. We want to get into the nuts and bolts,
hmm
understand their recent performance, their financial health, and really get a clear picture of where they're trying to take the company.
Exactly. So our mission here is to pull out the key info from this note, financials, future plans, how they compare in the industry. We want to give you a clear, concise understanding of Aimtron's path.
And it's quite a path already. That FY25 revenue, INR 159 crore, that's a huge jump, 71% year over year.
Yeah, impressive stuff. Okay, so let's unpack what's actually fueling this kind of growth. Where did Aimtron start?
Well, their background is in printed circuit board PCB design and assembly, kind of a pure play in that area initially.
Right.
But what's interesting is how they've evolved. They're now positioning themselves as a one-stop shop, an electronic system design and manufacturing provider, ESDM.
So much more than just PCBs now.
Oh, yeah. They handle the whole process. PCB design, assembly, sure, but also manufacturing complete electronic systems, that's the box build part.
Okay.
Plus, customized solutions, things like automated microelectronics assembly, integrating precision components. It's really end-to-end, from concept to a finished product, ready to go.
When you say box build, what does that really entail? Is it just sticking boards in a case?
No, it's generally more involved than that. It often includes integrating software, doing quite rigorous testing, making sure the whole system works and is ready for the market. It's definitely a step up in complexity and value.
Got it. And those FY25 numbers again. Revenue INR 159 crore.
That's right, with an EBITDA of INR 34 crore and profit after tax, PHI, of INR 26 crore. Also worth noting, the stock isn't currently rated by analysts, so this discussion gives a bit of an independent look.
Okay, good point. Now, the future plans. That FY26 target. INR 280 crore revenue. That's aiming high.
It is. And crucially, they seem confident they can maintain their current PATE margin, which is around 16%.
So if you run the numbers, that points to a pay of roughly INR 45 crore in FY26.
Exactly. Those are some pretty punchy growth forecasts.
What's underpinning that confidence, do you think? What assumptions are they making?
Well, based on that guidance, you're looking at year-over-year growth around 75% for revenue and maybe 79% for PATI in FY26. It's a significant ramp up.
Where's that surge expected to come from?
The management did mention a sort of cyclical pattern to their revenue, which isn't unusual in manufacturing. They expect the second half of the fiscal year to be stronger, both for revenue and for project execution.
Okay, so seasonality plays a part. But those targets are still substantial? What's changing in their business mix to support that? The note mentions a shift, right?
It does, yeah. If you look at FY25, their traditional PCB/PCBA business was about 72% of revenue. Box build was around 25%.
Okay.
But looking ahead, they expect box build to grow significantly. They're projecting it to hit 35% of revenue in FY26.
And longer term.
Longer term, the strategy seems to be for box build to actually overtake PCBA as the main revenue driver. It's a clear signal they're focusing on those more integrated, higher value solutions.
That pivot to box build.
No
What
worries.
does that really tell us about their strategy?
It suggests they want to capture more value. Instead of just supplying a component, they become a partner in delivering the whole product. That can mean stronger client ties, potentially better margins too, because the work is more complex.
Right, makes sense. Okay, so ambition is high. What about the pipeline? Let's talk order book. End of FY25, it was INR 189 crore.
Yes, and that's up quite a bit from the INR 135 crore they reported at the end of H1, so good momentum there.
Where's the demand coming from? Which sectors?
It seems pretty well spread out. That INR 189 crore braced down into IoT and robotics leading the pack at 28%. Then you've got industrial at 23%, automotive at 20%, and telecom around 19%.
So nicely diversified.
Yeah, it suggests broad-based demand, which is usually a healthy sign.
And it didn't stop there, did it? The note mentions April.
That's right. Just in the first 3 weeks of April, they apparently secured enough new orders to push the total book over INR 275 crore.
Wow, okay. That's a very strong start to FY26 already.
Yeah.
Any insight into what drove that specific surge in April?
The note doesn't break down that specific influx in detail, but the overall trend is clearly strong demand across their main sectors. And perhaps even more telling is the volume of inquiries they're getting.
Oh.
Yeah, they mentioned something like INR 800 crore to 1,000 crore worth of inquiries just in the last couple of months.
That's huge potential.
It is. Even if their win rate is, say, 20 to 40%, which they suggest, that still translates into a massive pipeline for future orders.
Okay, so demand seems robust. Let's switch gears to profitability. FY25 EBITDA margin was 21%. That's down a bit from 25% in FY24. Any reason given for that dip?
Yeah, management mainly put that down to shifts in the revenue mix across different industries, particularly in the last quarter, Q4 FY25. But even at 21%, when you look
It
around,
still looks pretty good compared to others.
exactly. You look at peers like Scient DLM, their EBITDA margin is around 9%, Patty maybe 5%. Avalon Technologies, even lower, maybe 5% EBITDA, 3% PAT.
So Aimtron's 21% EBITDA and that 16% PAT margin really stand out.
They do.
How do they explain that outperformance?
Management points to their client base. They work with some big names, Schneider Electric, Tata, ABB India. These companies tend to have, really strict vendor selection processes.
So getting in is tough, but once you're in,
You tend to build sticky relationships. It leads to repeat business, and working with demanding clients likely allows them to maintain better margins for the quality and reliability they provide.
right, quality commands a premium. Okay, so they have the orders, they have the margins, but can they actually deliver on this scale of growth? What about their capacity?
They seem pretty confident here, too. Their current setup includes 5 SMT lines, that's surface mount technology, plus a hefty 37 through-hole technology lines, and 3 lines specifically for box build assembly.
And they're running just one shift currently.
Yeah, currently operating on a single shift, but they have clear plans to add a second shift when needed.
Could you briefly explain the difference between SMT and through-hole? Why have both?
Sure. SMT is for smaller components mounted directly onto the surface of the PCB. Through-hole uses components with leads that go through holes in the board and are soldered on the other side. Having both means they can handle a much wider variety of product designs, from older tech to the very latest.
Okay. And they mentioned an internal system.
Yes, they've developed their own ERP system called AimNet. They say it helps manage the entire workflow efficiently, paperless, from customer interaction right through to dispatch. Internal optimization like that is key for scaling up smoothly.
Definitely.
And here's a really key point. Management believes they can scale revenue up to the INR 450, maybe 500 crore level, without needing major capital expenditure.
Really? With current facilities?
That's what they indicate. Plus, they paid off all their debt in the first half of FY25, and they're not planning any significant capex in the near future. That puts them in a really strong financial position to fund growth internally.
So strong orders, good margins, capacity in place, and no big spending needed soon. That sounds like a solid foundation. Now, the note also mentioned their U.S. operations.
Yes, that's another interesting angle. Aimtron has related group companies in the U.S. doing EMS work. These aren't part of the listed Indian entity, though.
But they're substantial.
Apparently so. Around INR 500 crore in revenue over there with 10 SMT machines.
And the strategy is,
To create synergy. Use the U.S. presence, the relationships there, to funnel clients towards the manufacturing capabilities here in India.
leveraging the cost advantages in India, perhaps.
Exactly. They even set up a wholly owned subsidiary, Aimtron Electronics LLC, in Texas in FY24, specifically to tap the U.S. market via their Indian operations.
What kind of synergies are we talking about? Cost is one. Anything else?
Could be several things. Cost, obviously, but also using the U.S. side for client acquisition, maybe initial design work or prototyping, while doing the volume manufacturing in India. It gives them a global footprint.
And does much business flow between them now?
Quite a bit, it seems. Around 20% of the Indian entity's FY25 revenue actually came from these related group companies. So that internal relationship is already pretty significant and has potential to grow.
Okay, that makes sense. A well-integrated strategy. The note also touched on diversifying revenue streams, didn't it? Beyond just PCB and box build focus.
That's right. They're actively targeting sectors known for better margins, like IoT and robotics, which we saw reflected in the order book, but also defense and aerospace.
And looking ahead to FY26.
They expect significant contributions not just from IoT robotics and industrials, which are already strong, but also growing shares from telecom and network security. It shows they're successfully broadening their industry focus.
The note mentions Exhibit 7 showing this diversification trend over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And Exhibit 9 gives a look at their product portfolio. Any specific products that stand out there?
Yeah, looking at the portfolio, you see things like controllers for industrial automation, various IoT devices, communication gear. It aligns pretty well with that strategic shift towards more complex, integrated systems in these target sectors.
Got it. And there was another exhibit breaking down the order book.
Right, Exhibit 8. It details an INR 189 crore closing order book for FY25, shows the industry split we discussed, IoT robotics at 28%, industrial 23%, and so on, but it also shows the segment split.
PCBA versus box build.
Exactly. And interestingly, box build accounted for 55% of that closing order book value, with PCBA at 41%. That really highlights the shift in demand they're seeing and leaning into.
That 55% is a strong indicator, definitely underscores the strategy. Okay, so let's maybe zoom out a bit and look at the overall financial picture presented.
Sure. The note summarizes trends from FY21 to FY25. The standout, as we mentioned, is that revenue compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of 32%. That's Exhibit 1, shows really consistent growth over 5 years.
Quite a journey from where they were.
Indeed. And it's not just top-line growth. Exhibit 2 points to consistently healthy EBITDA margins over that period. Exhibits 3 and 4 show solid return ratios and generally improving profitability, so it seems like managed growth.
Not just growth for growth's sake.
Right. Exhibit 6 touches on working capital things like debtor days, inventory days, important metrics for operational efficiency, especially as they scale. Worth keeping an eye on those.
And finally, valuation. The note mentioned a PE ratio.
Yeah, trading at about 42 times on a trailing 12-month basis when the note was written. Just one data point, of course, but gives some context on market perception.
Okay, so if we were to boil it down for you, the listener, what are the absolute key takeaways from this management meet note on Aimtron?
I'd say a very strong and growing order book, really ambitious growth targets that seem somewhat supported by current momentum, that clear strategic shift towards the higher value box build solutions.
Their profitability, which stands out against peers.
Right. Sufficient capacity already in place for significant expansion without huge immediate spending, and that clever strategy to leverage their U.S. ties for growth in India.
So putting it all together, this deep dive into Aimtron paints a picture of a company with, well, real momentum. A clear strategy within the EMS sector.
Yeah, the ambitious targets combined with the strong order book and operational setup suggest, a potentially promising path.
It definitely makes you think about the broader context, doesn't it? How Aimtron's story fits into the bigger picture of electronics manufacturing supply chain shifts.
For sure. Which leads us to a final thought for you to ponder. We've heard their ambitious targets, seen the strong order book. What do you think might be the biggest challenges or maybe the biggest untapped opportunities for Aimtron as they try to actually hit those goals in the next few years?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.